Hi folks, how's it going? My name is Darren. If you don't know me, hello. If you do know me, hello. I just thought that I would create a video elaborating on some thoughts that I shared earlier on Twitter regarding the situation with comedian Janey Godley, who is at the centre of a controversy which relates to historic and not so historic tweets and social media engagement generally, which has rightly been condemned as offensive, insensitive, racist, disablest. Basically, the sort of chat that maybe at a certain time many of us would wrongly have construed as banter, and certain language that many of us would have thrown around, perhaps not necessarily considering the impact on others. So basically, all of that stuff has come to light primarily because she accepted a job by the Scottish Government to front a public health ad campaign related to COVID, and with that public money comes additional public scrutiny. So just a couple of kind of thoughts off the top, which is uh, Janey Godley was wrong. She has apologised. For some, the kind of tone and content of her apology was not satisfactory. For others, it was satisfactory. But now we're at a point where not only has she rightly been dropped from the position in the ad campaign and since apologised and then donated the £12,000 fee to charity. There is now a campaign to essentially uh, pressure her other employers. Obviously, she's an actor. She does appearances on TV and panel shows. This is her livelihood as a comedian, and so there's a concerted effort in some quarters to basically try and interrupt her ability to earn and to provide for herself and her family. Now, I agree that it was right that she apologised, and I think it's commendable that she did so quickly. Having been involved in a situation not too dissimilar to this myself, not long ago, the mistake I made at the time was not just holding my hands up straight away. But at that point, it wasn't entirely clear to me what it was I had done wrong. Such was the extent of my ignorance. And then also the additional factor of other people who you're associated with, their behaviour being attributed to you, and then there being running battles going on social media that you're not aware of because you're living in the real world as well as the social media world. And so then you can't be across everything in a manner that everyone expects or sees as reasonable. And so everything you do just inflames the situation and makes it worse. So she held her hands up straight away. She said sorry. Now what we're dealing with, I think, is ultimately shame culture. Now, people call this cancel culture like it's a new thing, but shame culture is really just a part of how humans behave in cultures, so families, communities, tribes, and shame serves a purpose. It serves a purpose for the individual. It serves a purpose for the community. When we experience shame, then often the right dose and with the right understanding of what it means, it can produce better behaviour. It can produce growth. It can produce contrition, which is necessary to repairing a harm that's been done. And at the level of a community, shame can form as an act of retribution, to pay some kind of debt. It can be a form of deterrence at the community level. So it's saying, look, this is what will happen to you if you do this. And then also it can help to rehabilitate people. So in that sense, there's kind of parallels. You can see a lot of these concepts have been formalised in the criminal justice system, but they find their roots in the informal social control that arises in communities naturally. Whatever culture, whatever part of the world, whatever the historical, social, political, cultural context is, there are different things that are shameful. There are different things that you need to be held accountable for. but we're not dealing with cancel culture here. We're just dealing with shame culture. That's what it is, right? So let's just move away from the cancel culture thing and then just think about, okay, so if you're the person or the people who understandably or rightly are upset, offended by what Jane Godley has said, then what are you looking for? Are you looking for a change in behaviour? Are you looking to make an example of her? Or are you looking to punish her? And where does that punishment end? And where does the taking of liberties begin? Because ultimately, even the most serious perpetrators of the most serious things within our society um, are often entitled to a certain period of punishment before it becomes acceptable for them to try and get on with their life. And while I don't want to undermine the seriousness of some of the things that Janey said, I think that I don't think that it's indicative of any deeper dark aspect of her character. I don't think that it's evidence of some other ulterior dimension of her as a sinister person or a person with bad motives. I think, and I guess it's an indictment of our culture generally. She's been caught saying things that which were daily words at a certain time, and that's no excuse, obviously, but there it is. Now, the other thing is that there are compounding factors that mean that the severity of the public shaming that she's experiencing is prolonged and sustained and concerted as it is. Janey is a divisive figure for many reasons. One obvious reason is she's a comedian. No, there are no comedians out there who are 100% approval rating. Humour is a subjective thing, and so there is naturally going to be people who just don't find her banter funny. The second aspect that is potentially divisive is the fact that she has really kind of she's really been quite open about some of her political views. She sort of became a household name doing parody videos where she would overdub her voice over footage of Nicola Sturgeon or and by doing that she aligned herself with the not just the pro indie movement but the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon. So that's additionally divisive. And then I think that she's made her voice known on some other issues, trans issues and things like that. And I don't want to get bogged down talking about the specific issues, but obviously live issues which are contentious in our culture and which people have very strong opinions about. The other thing is that what I think happens sometimes with artists who align too closely with politics and who experience a kind of ascent in terms of their public visibility, their fame, their earning capacity, their cultural prominence. What happens is they can end up being subject to audience capture, which is something that happens on social media a lot. You'll notice it with podcasters who kind of begin in a place of seeming kind of fair-minded and then they seem to just veer off away. And that's partly the role that sort of social media and algorithms play. People respond to certain kind of topics, they interact, the engagement metrics are something that the person's assessing subtly. They're saying, I got a lot of views and a lot of likes and interaction for that kind of content, I'll do more of that. And that happens subconsciously. And I think what's happened is Janey Godley has appealed more to a certain section of the pro-independence crowd with the kind of videos and content that she's done. And subsequently then, by doing that, she's become a kind of irritating force or even been perceived as an abusive force in terms of how she's interacted with people on the other side of that divide. Now, speaking as an artist myself and someone, a kind of a minor public figure in Scotland, I have experience of this. I was part of the indie movement I was quite closely aligned with a political campaign for a while until I started to realise that actually it was kind of impairing my ability to think objectively about what was going on. And there were massive constraints in terms of, I started to realise, all right, hang on, I'm popular in this movement as long as I say certain things. But then if I start to say other things, then I'm going to be rejected. I'm going to be discarded. I'm going to be basically just tossed to the side. And all the things that people once celebrated about me will become a stick that they'll beat me with. And so I pulled back from that because I recognise if I'm going to have a place, or any artist is going to have a place in a culture where they have principles in politics, you want to try and create a sort of space where you can be visible about what your politics and your principles are, and not compromise on them, but also that it's open and that you're not getting locked in your own silo where you're just being validated constantly by people who have broadly the same views as you. And so over time, it makes sense to kind of cultivate a news feed or an algorithm which is quite politically and socially and culturally diverse, not necessarily because you agree with everybody or because you want to be popular, but because it's important to always be getting exposed to the different vibes that are going on out there. And I think that leads ultimately to creating better content, more provocative content, because there are more lines to exploit, there are more areas to move through, and ultimately there's more potential for more people to engage with that and learn more. So I think that there's been an issue generally with Janey has been kind of audience captured. And so then there is a natural lack of sympathy and empathy for her because she's seen from one side of a divide as the kind of embodiment of a certain type of pro-independence voice. So this is an unfortunate confluence of circumstances for anybody to find themselves in when unsavoury things that they've said in the past come to light. Being on the front page of newspapers for this sort of stuff, and again, to emphasise, I'm not saying that it doesn't warrant public scrutiny, but from the standpoint of the person it's happening to, it must be very frightening. It must be quite scary. I mean, basically today's just an ongoing discussion on Scottish Twitter about how many of her jobs she should lose, how quickly she should lose them, what the full extent of this kind of public shaming should be. And I think what we might be missing, and this is my kind of appeal to anyone out there who's invested in this issue either way, is that in Janey, I've always detected a kind of vulnerability. A vulnerability, not necessarily just in based on her past experiences and her difficult, traumatic childhood is a matter of public knowledge. I won't go into it here, but there are significant events and episodes in her life which, for me, provide context that helps to explain some of her behaviour in terms of that might create a divisive persona. So you notice that she focuses a lot on criticism that she receives. She retweets it, she screenshots it. I think part of that's about trying to hold people accountable, but then part of it also is, I think that she's in a state of kind of hypervigilance, where she's watching for the criticism, and so she sees more of it. And that's not to say that the criticism she receives is not so numerous as to warrant her concern, but we're kind of pattern-seeking creatures. So when the framing of our reality is, I'm a person who gets a lot of abuse as a result of things that have happened in the past, that's what you're watching for. That's what you're surveying in the landscape. Another aspect is that kind of often abrasive, some might say aggressive persona. That sort of I don't give a fuck and who the fuck are you, and this kind of gregariousness, which it can be off-putting for some, particularly if you're speaking with a kind of working class accent. There is a bit of classism at play here, but that's for another video. Anyway, the point is that often these personas are constructs, and they are constructed to create an illusory sense of security within a person who is deeply traumatised. And then the final thing to look for is, why would she take a job with the government in the first place? Because obviously any artist is looking for a bit of public validation, aren't they? Or they wouldn't subject themselves to the ongoing existential nightmare of creating something and then subjecting it to public criticism. So there's an aspect of the artist generally which is already vulnerable, and I think that that is additionally the case when someone has experienced difficulties in their life. So she gets offered the job. I don't think she needs the fee as much as it is a considerable fee. So there's obviously a thing there. All right, so that'll be more visibility. So maybe if I have more visibility, maybe people will get a chance to see, and maybe they'll see a different version of me. Maybe I'll get the chance. Maybe more people will like me. Maybe more people will like me. Maybe people will stop saying, the mean things that they say, or da 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 da. And so in all these different aspects of Janey's behaviour, away from this controversy, I have already observed a vulnerability. And so that's why I'm taking the difficult position of saying that irrespective of what has been said here, and not irrespective of who's been hurt by it, but I'm asking people who are weighing up what this means and maybe joining the pile-on to truly sit for a moment and consider, if someone has been held accountable for something they've said, they've held their hands up, they've apologised, they've donated £12,000 to a charity as a gesture of their apology and their contrition, then we have to ask ourselves, what more must they do? What more must they do? Now, obviously, a lot of people will say, this is hypocritical. She's always piling on people. She's always doing this, that, and the next thing. And all of that is completely valid. All of that is completely valid. So see if you're the sort of person that just kind of smells blood here and you're just going in for the kill, fine. If that makes you feel better, then cool. But see, for some of you who can kind of sense that there are liberties being taken a wee bit here, and that sometimes sometimes we talk a lot about being compassionate, but we're only compassionate to the people that is easy to be compassionate towards, when actually sometimes real compassion is a difficult thing to summon within ourselves, because we can be legitimately angry at somebody, we can be legitimately furious, legitimately offended, legitimately hurt, but sometimes we have to find that compassion within us. Because my concern here is that, and maybe I'm just projecting, but I fear that situations like this, where a person who has experienced real trauma in their life, who is in the public eye, and is having to go through a sustained process of shame and fear and attack on an industrial scale, which is entirely unnatural, then a situation like that can go south very quickly. And it's not the kind of thing that I would want to see, or that I would want to be a part of. At the end of the day, she has brought some of this on herself, but she's not brought all of it on herself. She hasn't. And it's very clear, without getting bogged down in the politics of it all, that these sometimes more localised cancellation attempts, they're not always just about the thing the person's been caught out for, or the thing they're being called out for. That then just becomes a Trojan horse to legitimise a whole load of built up prior grievances. And so not only is there a lack of self-awareness on the part of some, whose past behaviour does not warrant this kind of holier than thou attitude that they're taking towards Janey, but also I feel that ultimately we deny ourselves the opportunity to really understand, like, when we say we want this kind of cancel culture to stop, well, we have to start trying to stop it somewhere. So that starts with a personal, individual effort to not indulge in it. And I'm going to try and be consistent in this regard, because it's one thing when it's somebody you kind of vaguely know or have a sense of, so you feel sympathy towards them and kind of jump in their corner, but then the next day it's fucking somebody that you just consider an absolute arsehole, so you don't care, so you join the pile on for a laugh. But obviously, this aspect of behaviour on social media is almost involuntary, to be honest. We get involved in it because it's a trending topic and we're on social media out of a kind of instinct to scratch a psychological itch. So the idea that this is even really happening is questionable, because so much of it arises out of addictive behaviour and impulsive behaviour and dishonest behaviour and inauthentic behaviour, while we're all portraying ourselves as whiter than white right down the line, Captain Consistent over here. And there's just something right at the core of it which just does not sit well with me when it's happening to a woman whose history of abuse is well documented, and it is very clear that her defects of personality arise from a lot of those experiences. Her quest to become a comedian, to be validated by strangers, arises from that experience. And whatever you think of her politics and whatever you think of her behaviour, there comes a point where it's just too much. There comes a point where it's excessive, and there comes a point where it is abusive. And that is my view on it. Now, I realise I'm going to end up drawing fire from some quarters as a result of saying that. I don't want to get involved. I've been through a kind of a smaller scale version of this myself, and I can tell you that it's a very difficult experience, and that the kind of the image of you that ascends in that maelstrom is often so removed from the reality of you that it can be really, really deeply confusing to be the person at the eye of a storm like that, because you've moved on in your life. You don't associate necessarily with the prior version of yourself that said or did the stupid things, but you still have to be held accountable for it. It's a bit like the stupid shit you do when you're drunk, and then you wake up in the morning and you've got to take responsibility for the stuff that drunk you did. And you walk around knowing everybody is just remembering drunk you. Life is more complicated. It's right that she said sorry. She should never have taken the job in the first place. It was always going to end in tears. It's a symptom of her need for validation to take that job in the first place. But also the Scottish Government, they should have seen this coming, because she is a divisive figure in the sense that she attracts a lot of controversy. And so why would you ask someone who would potentially be the subject of a backlash to front a public health campaign in the first place? You know, it's not just due diligence to cover your own arse and make sure that the person's not going to bring any controversy in your direction. It's due diligence to make sure that you're not employing somebody who's unaware that they're actually making themselves vulnerable by taking a government post in a public institution, fronting a public health advertisement campaign. So there's just so many levels, I think, to this. And I'm sorry, Janey, if I'm overstepping the mark here, if you watch this, or if I'm speaking out of turn, or if I'm putting words in your mouth. That's not my intent. I'm just trying to encourage people to just think a wee bit more deeply. Just try and find it within yourself to imagine what it would be like if it was you. And if you're somebody who is genuinely deeply hurt by things that she said, and genuinely offended, or genuinely finds she's a divisive person who is not deserving of your compassion, do you know what? I can't fault you for that, right? You're entitled to take that position. Fair enough. But see, for those of you that are kind of swaying, just stop, man. Just stop. It's not worth it. What are we trying to produce here? Are we trying to produce a change in attitude? Are we trying to produce an apology? What threshold must Janey meet in order for this to stop? Because if that is not clear, then this is not fair. Take it easy.